Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, March 14, 2025. Senate passes a bill to prevent a federal government shutdown at midnight tonight. The vote was 54 to 46, but the key vote was earlier, a procedural hurdle. It needed 60, got 62, 38 noes, 10 Democrats joining Republicans in voting yes. President Donald Trump gives a speech at the Justice Department where he says, as we begin a new chapter in American justice, we're turning the page on 4 long years of corruption, weaponization, and surrender to violent criminals, and we are restoring fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. Secretary of State Marco Rubio gives updates on negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, and Hamas saying it's willing to release an American hostage. Dr. Mehmet Oz, nominated for leader of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, tells the Senate Finance Committee we have a generational opportunity to fix our health care system and help people stay healthy for longer. Democrats asked him if he'll pledge not to cut Medicaid funding. And former U.S. Senator Alan Simpson, Republican of Wyoming, has died at the age of 93. From the Hill, the Senate voted mostly along party lines Friday afternoon to pass the House Republican-drafted bill to fund government through September, avoiding a government shutdown only hours before funding was due to lapse. President Trump expected to sign the bill into law. The final vote was 54 to 46. 2 members of the Democratic caucus voted for the bill, Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, who's retiring at the end of the current term, and Angus King of Maine, an independent who caucuses with Democrats. Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, voted no. The key, though, was an earlier procedural vote to limit debate and move towards final passage. That needed 60 and therefore Democratic help. It passed 62 to 38 with 10 members of the Democratic caucus voting yes. Dick Durbin of Illinois, Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Gary Peters of Michigan, Brian Schatz of Hawaii, Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, and Angus King of Maine. Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the majority leader, spoke before the votes.
Mr. President, I've spoken a lot about it being a new day in America. It's also a new day in the United States Senate. When I became leader, I promised we would do things differently around here. I think the last 10 weeks show I was serious about that. Unfortunately, today our business is cleaning up from the old way of doing things. We're voting on yet another continuing resolution today because last year's Democrat majority pushed off full-year appropriations again and again. Last summer, the Appropriations Committee reported out 11 of its 12 bills with bipartisan support. 6 of those bills passed out of the committee unanimously. But month after month, Leader Schumer found something more important to do than fund the government. And not one of those 11 bipartisan bills ever came to the floor. So today we're trying to finish up last year's work so that we can begin to do this year's work. To be clear, Republicans aren't thrilled about another CR, but it is our best option to make sure that last year's failure by Democrats doesn't interfere with this year's appropriations process. And I'm hopeful that enough Democrats will reject their party's threat of shutting down the government to get this bill passed today. As I said yesterday, it's time to move on. And moving forward, appropriation bills are going to be a priority in the Senate. When the Appropriations Committee sends a bill to the floor, my goal is to bring it to the floor for consideration. And I hope that my Democrat colleagues will cooperate in that effort. We're going to have a debate, consider amendments, and vote. And we're going to try to avoid the end-of-year pileup and continuing resolutions that I know we are all tired of. Mr. President, another continuing resolution, another CR, was nobody's first choice. But I can tell you this, the next time the Senate votes on an appropriation bill, it won't be on the eve of another shutdown. So I appreciate my colleagues' support for this continuing resolution, and I look forward to a much better process for fiscal year 2026.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the majority leader on the Senate floor before the Senate voted to advance the Republican-drafted continuing resolution to prevent the government shutdown. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said today the same thing he said yesterday. He'd be voting yes.
Well, Mr. President, as everyone knows, government funding expires at midnight tonight. As I announced yesterday, I will vote to keep the government open. I believe it is the best way to minimize the harm that the Trump administration will do to the American people. Clearly, this is a Hobson's choice. The CR is a bad bill. But as bad as the CR is, I believe allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option. A shutdown would allow DOJ to shift into overdrive. Let me repeat, a shutdown will allow DOJ to shift into overdrive. It would give Donald Trump and DOJ the keys to the city, state, and country. Donald Trump and Elon Musk would be free to destroy vital government services at a much faster rate than they can right now, and over a much broader field of destruction that they would render. In a shutdown, Donald Trump and DOJ will have the power to determine what is considered essential and what is not. And their views on what is not essential would be mean and vicious, and would decimate vital services and cause unimaginable harm to the American people. Making matters even worse, in a shutdown, there is no check on their determinations, Trump and DOJ's determinations on what is essential and what is not. In fact, on February the 26th, OMB, led by Russell Vought, told agencies to work with DOJ to create a list of non-essential workers so that they could reduce staffing even faster in a shutdown. They're already preparing for a shutdown. Musk has told everybody he wants a shutdown because he knows it will help him achieve his horrible goal of just decimating the federal government from one end to the other. In other words, if government were to shut down, DOJ has a plan in place to exploit the crisis for maximum destruction. In a shutdown, American families would be hurt in ways they almost have never been. It could disrupt regional Veterans Affairs offices, curtail mental health services, accelerate plans to slash stash at Social Security offices. The list goes on and on and on of the damage, the severe damage they could do, virtually unchecked. And they can stay in a shutdown as long as they want. There is no off-ramp unless they decide to take that off-ramp, and they won't, because this is their best tool for achieving their goal: slash government, slash spending, and use that money for tax breaks for billionaires.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader on the Senate floor. President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, congratulations to Chuck Schumer for doing the right thing. It took guts and courage. The big tax cuts, LA fire fix, debt ceiling bill, and so much more is coming. We should all work together on that very dangerous situation. A non-pass would be a country destroyer. Approval will lead to new heights. Again, really good and smart move by Senator Schumer. This could lead to something big for the USA, a whole new direction and beginning, signed Donald J. Trump on Truth Social. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, said on the Senate floor today she'd be a no vote on this bill.
The year-long CR House Republicans sent our way hands a blank check to Elon Musk and Donald Trump to decide how our constituents' taxpayer dollars get spent, all while cutting the funding working people count on each and every day. It is anything but a, quote, clean CR. What Republicans are pushing here is not a continuing resolution. In this case, CR stands for complete resignation, because what Republicans are doing here is ceding more discretion to two billionaires to decide what does and does not get funded in their states. It is a power grab CR. But not only that, it does make serious cuts to domestic funding. It leaves our working families in the dust. We are talking about a nearly 50% cut to life-saving medical research into conditions affecting our service members. It is a giant shortfall in funding for NIH. It is a massive cut in funding for Army Corps projects and $15 billion less for our domestic priorities. Madam President, this bill will force Social Security to cut staff and close offices and make it harder for our seniors to get the benefits they spent their careers paying into the system to earn. It creates a devastating shortfall that risks tens of thousands of Americans losing their housing. So this bill causes real pain for communities across the country. And let me be clear, this bill empowers Trump and Musk to pick winners and losers, and I guarantee you they will not only go after Democrats. Inexplicably, House Republicans are saying, give Trump all this power or we'll shut down government. Well, let's be very clear. That is and always has been a false choice. The reality is there were other options House Republicans could have chosen, but they chose to pull out of bipartisan negotiations and send a deeply partisan bill here to the Senate today.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State and ranking member on the Appropriations Committee on the Senate floor, before the vote to advance the Republican-drafted version of the CR, continuing resolution to prevent the government shutdown that she spoke about. Enough Democrats did join Republicans to move it forward, getting over the 60 mark. There was one Republican who voted no, Rand Paul of Kentucky. He also spoke on the floor before the vote.
President Trump has pledged to balance the budget. I want to help him. I want to help him with this task. But to balance the budget requires much less spending than this current bill entails. Our national debt now exceeds $36 trillion. That's 124% of the size of our economy. That should not be a surprise. We're adding $2 trillion every year to the debt, this year included. Critics of excessive federal spending have rightly argued that we should return spending to pre-pandemic levels. This is something I could support. The spending bill before us, though, spends $400 billion more than we were spending before the pandemic. Spending went through the roof during the pandemic, and it never came back down, and the deficits are out of control. In order for this bill to get back to pre-pandemic levels, it would have to be $400 billion less. That's something I could support.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. The Senate voted to advance the Republican version of the continuing resolution to prevent the government shutdown. 10 Democrats joining enough Republicans, Rand Paul the only one who voted no, and the vote was 62 to 38, more than the 60 needed. The Senate then passed the bill by a vote of 54 to 46. There's a story from The Hill. Pass the Torch, a grassroots Democratic group that called for former President Biden to step out of the 2024 presidential race, is now calling for Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, to resign as minority leader. The group is part of a chorus of anger within the Democratic Party after Schumer said he would vote with Republican senators to advance the House GOP's spending bill, which includes various provisions Democrats oppose. That was from The Hill, and this came up at the news conference today with the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York.
You talk about the problem with saying, oh, this isn't just one individual, but still, doesn't this still send a message to Americans, the fact that it's the leader of the Senate, Democrats, who has already said he's making this decision, and you already have 66 of your House colleagues sending him a letter saying that they're not approving of this?
When I travel the country, the American people are concerned about if their kids get sick, can they go see a doctor? And we have a problem with the fact that Republicans are cutting health care in this partisan spending bill. There are veterans in this country who want to know that after serving this country, sacrificing, putting their lives on the line, that their country will be there for them in the way that they were there for America. There are mothers and fathers who are struggling to make ends meet. They are working hard. They're playing by the rules. But they're not sure whether they can put food on the table day to day, week to week, month to month. And the Republicans in this bill just like they're cutting veterans' benefits, are cutting nutritional assistance to children and families. That's what we have a problem with. That Republicans are hurting the American people. That's why House Democrats are strongly opposed to this bill.
Leader Jeffries, Senator Chuck Schumer is from your state. He clearly has a different view of this than you. He is not saying let's go back to the negotiating table. He's saying let's take this vote. So have you lost confidence in him, the fact that you guys see this so differently?
Next question.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today. ABC News writes that activist parents and D.C. lawmakers launched an all-out blitz on Capitol Hill Friday, culminating in the arrest of 11 people outside Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's office. Capitol Police confirmed to ABC News the demonstration was organized by the Sunrise Movement, which called for action in response to Schumer's support of the Trump-Johnson budget. Wall Street today, the Dow up 650, NASDAQ up 451, S&P up 117. From Politico, President Donald Trump on Friday walked into the Department of Justice and labeled his courtroom opponents scum, judges corrupt, and the prosecutors who investigated him deranged. With the DOJ logo directly behind him, Trump called for his legal tormentors to be sent to prison. In remarks that were, by turns, dark, exultant, and pugnacious, Trump vowed to remake the agency and retaliate against his enemies. It was, even by Trump's standards, a stunning show of disregard for decades of tradition observed by his predecessors, who worried about politicizing or appearing to exert too much control over the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency. Trump instead called himself the chief law enforcement officer in the country and accused the DOJ's prior leadership of doing everything within their power to prevent him from becoming the president. That was the article from Politico. Here's part of the speech by the president.
For generations, the Federal Department of Justice was one of America's most revered institutions. The men and women of the DOJ brought down the mafia, hunted down the killers, kingpins, and spies, tracked down terrorists and traitors, and tore down corrupt political machines all across America. This department commanded the respect and admiration of the entire world. And with Pam and Cash and all of the people I introduced and far more, big numbers, and all of you sitting back there, I recognize so many of you. But with you leading the way, it'll soon be the most admired and most respected of all. You're going to be more respected, and I really believe that there's also a lot of things to solve, a lot of problems to solve. But that's going to put you in the upper tier and maybe the top tier, and I believe that's going to happen. I'm so proud of the people in this room. But first, we must be honest about the lies and abuses that have occurred within these walls. Unfortunately, in recent years, a corrupt group of hacks and radicals within the ranks of the American government obliterated the trust and goodwill built up over generations. They weaponized the vast powers of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to try and thwart the will of the American people. You remember the 51 intelligence agents that said, as an example, that Hunter Biden's laptop from hell came from Russia when they knew it came right from his bedroom. They knew that. It was a big lie, and they knew it so well. They spied on my campaign, launched one hoax and disinformation operation after another, broke the law on a colossal scale, persecuted my family, staff, and supporters, raided my home, Mar-a-Lago, and did everything within their power to prevent me from becoming the President of the United States. With the help of radicals like Mark Elias, Mark Pomerantz, and these are people that nobody's ever seen anything like it. So many others, but these are people that are bad people, really bad people. They tried to turn America into a corrupt, communist, and third world country. But in the end, the thugs failed and the truth won. Freedom won, justice won, democracy won, and above all, the American people won. There could be no more heinous betrayal of American values than to use the law to terrorize the innocent and reward the wicked. And that's what they were doing at a level that's never been seen before. And it's exactly what you saw with Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, and their cronies to do the building of the last 4 years. What they've ripped down is incalculable. But what you're going to build up is likewise something that will be breaking all sorts of records. They set loose violent criminals while targeting patriotic parents at school board meetings. They drop charges against Antifa and Hamas supporters while labeling traditional Catholics as domestic terrorists. The Catholics, we did very well with the Catholic vote, so I want to thank them for that. They really did, record numbers.
President Donald Trump giving a speech at the Justice Department. After the speech, across the street, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, held a news conference.
The tirade we just witnessed is one more grim landmark in the spreading authoritarianism of this administration, and it is a brand new embarrassment to the once revered Department of Justice. It's fascinating that the president used the word BS to describe the case against him, which resulted in dozens of criminal convictions, because that was the same word that his own Attorney General, William Barr, used to describe his deranged claim that he had won the 2020 presidential election when Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. That was the word that Attorney General Barr, even one of his greatest defenders, used to describe his delusional claims about how there was election fraud and election irregularities. No other president in American history has stood at the Department of Justice to proclaim an agenda of criminal prosecution and retaliation against his political foes. This thoroughly partisan and delusional diatribe was a staggering violation of the traditional boundary between independent criminal law enforcement and presidential political power. The speak we just witnessed is a desecration of the essential values of the storied department in every way. It's an insult to the thousands of professional lawyers who go to work at the Department of Justice every day to enforce the rule of law, not the personal vendettas and partisan games of a politician.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, at a news conference across the street from the Justice Department after President Trump gave his speech inside the department. You can find both the speech and the news conference at our video library in their entireties at cspan.org. From Associated Press, the Senate on Friday passed a bill that would result in more prison sentences for fentanyl traffickers, as both Republicans and Democrats seek to show they can act to rein in distribution of the deadly drug. The bill passed the Senate on an 84-16 vote, with all the nay votes coming from Democrats. It next heads to the House, where a similar version of the bill has already passed with significant Democratic support. From Reuters, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Friday there is a very good chance the war between Russia and Ukraine can end after Washington had, quote, productive discussions with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday. He added that he had requested that Putin spare the lives of completely surrounded Ukrainian troops, apparently referring to Ukrainian forces being pushed back out of the Kursk region, their only foothold on Russian territory. President Trump said in a Truth Social post, "We had a very good and productive discussion with President Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday, and there is a very good chance that this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end." White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt later said that President Trump had not spoken with Putin on Thursday, but that U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff had. That was reporting from Reuters. Secretary of State Marco Rubio talked about this as he opened the news conference at the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Quebec, Canada.
There was what we felt was a very positive and productive engagement yesterday with President Putin and Special Envoy Witkoff. Obviously, he is on his way back. He should be back, and hopefully we'll convene this weekend. We'll examine the Russian position more closely and determine, the president will then determine what the next steps are. Suffice it to say, I think there is reason to be cautiously optimistic. But by the same token, we continue to recognize this is a difficult and complex situation. It will not be easy. It will not be simple. But we certainly feel like we're at least some steps closer to ending this war and bringing peace. But it's still a long journey. It's a journey of many steps. But this is positive momentum. Obviously, we'll see what Russia and others are willing to do. It's not just Russia. Obviously, it has to be things acceptable to Ukraine. But it's been a good week in that front, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done. But, there's reason to be cautiously optimistic, but we'll know more once Special Envoy Woodcock, Ambassador Woodcock returns, and we have a chance to all convene and talk about it. And obviously, the president is the ultimate decider on next steps for the United States.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio at a news conference at the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Quebec, Canada. Voice of America reports that Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Friday there are reasons for cautious optimism regarding the proposed ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia following the talks between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Hamas, writes the New York Times, said on Friday that it had agreed to free Edan Alexander, an American-Israeli soldier who had been held in Gaza for 17 months, along with the remains of 4 other hostages with dual citizenship. Israel immediately cast doubt on the proposal's viability, suggesting a deal was unlikely to be imminent. That was from the New York Times article. Secretary Rubio was asked about this.
Will the U.S. be open to an agreement with Hamas to get American hostages released separate from the Israeli hostages, like including Edan Alexander?
Well, I think our priority always as the U.S. government is always that we care about all the hostages. We want all the hostages released. We believe they should all be released. Okay, and that, by the way, we talk about hostages, we're also talking about bodies. Okay, and these trades are being made, and they're ridiculous trades. We're talking about 400 people for 3. These are nuts. And on top of that, you see the condition these people are being released in. So this is think about what we're talking about here. I mean, we're sitting around as the world sort of accepting that it's normal and okay for you to go into a place, kidnap babies, kidnap teenagers, kidnap people that have nothing to do with any wars, that are not soldiers, that are not anything, and taking them and putting them in tunnels for almost a year and a half. And we're acting like if this is a normal exchange, this is a normal thing that happens. This is an outrage. So they should all be released. So I'm not going to comment on what we're going to accept or not accept, other than all of us. The whole world should continue to say that what Hamas has done is outrageous. It's ridiculous. It's sick. It's disgusting. It should never have happened. And we shouldn't accept it as normal, as a normal negotiation. We're just dealing with some savages. That's it. These are bad people, terrible people, and we need to treat them as such. But that said, we want all the hostages out.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio at a news conference in Canada at the close of the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting. Associated Press has an article, Immigration officials have arrested a second person who participated in pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University and have revoked the visa of another student, they announced Friday. Washington Today continues in a moment.
For 46 years, C-SPAN has been your unfiltered window into democracy, giving you direct access to Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House. But this public service isn't guaranteed. C-SPAN receives no government funding and relies on supporters like you. All this month, in honor of Founders Day and Brian Lamb's vision, you can help keep democracy unfiltered.
To the American people, now is the time to tune in to C-SPAN.
Donate now at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today. You can get us as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. From ABC News, Dr. Mehmet Oz, President Donald Trump's pick to lead the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, faced a confirmation hearing Friday before the Senate Finance Committee. Oz, a doctor and former television host whose nomination to lead CMS has put him in the political spotlight for the first time since his unsuccessful bid for a U.S. Senate seat 3 years ago, faces tough questions from Democrats on the 27-member committee, which will vote whether to move his nomination to a floor vote in front of the entire Senate. Oz talked about his accomplishments as a physician and TV host during his opening statement, noting the 10 Emmys his show won, and contended Trump wants to love and cherish Medicare and Medicaid. That was from the ABC News story. During the hearing, Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, ranking member, asked Dr. Oz about Medicaid.
Dr. Oz, I was listening carefully to your remarks, and you talked about cherishing Medicaid, and I think that's a very good sentiment. So I want to ask about how we're going to do that. Will you agree this morning, since you want to cherish Medicaid, to oppose any cuts to the Medicaid program? And I want a yes or no, because we all agree that we need to do more to fight fraud and such matters. But what I want to know, yes or no, is since you cherish Medicaid, will you agree to oppose cuts in the Medicaid program?
I cherish Medicaid, and I've worked within the Medicaid environment quite extensively, as I highlighted, practicing at Columbia University.
That's not the question, Doctor. The question is, will you oppose cuts to this program you say you cherish? Time's short.
I want to make sure that the patients today and in the future have resources to protect them if they get ill. The way you protect Medicaid is by making sure that it's viable at every level, which includes having enough practitioners to afford the services, paying them enough to do what you request of them, and making sure that patients are able to actually use Medicaid.
Let the record show that I asked a witness who said he cherishes this program, will you agree to oppose cuts? And he would not answer a yes or no question.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, Finance Committee ranking member at today's confirmation hearing for Dr. Mehmet Oz, up for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator. One of the questions from the committee chair, Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, was about Dr. Oz's support for encouraging Americans to stay healthy through the choices they make.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, your background and experiences bring a fresh perspective to the role of CMS Administrator. As an accomplished physician, you have firsthand experience not only with the bureaucratic nature of federal government payment programs, but also the impact of chronic disease, as you've discussed in your statement. I'd be curious if you would just expand a little more on your vision for CMS and how you would integrate nutrition and lifestyle-based interventions into our healthcare system.
Senator Crapo, when I walked into your office, you gave me an Idaho potato chip. You also gave me a large potato, but that's where those potato chips came from, and nothing else was added. If you look at the ingredient list, it was potato and a little bit of salt. You also had yogurt in your office, which was low-fat, flavored, and I would argue not as healthy. The average American has a difficult time making that choice, and we'll often incentivize products that aren't as healthy for the American people, which is confusing. One of the points that I mentioned at the end of my opening comment was that if we gave people in their hands tools, resources that are useful, not information, but tactics and support teams that could work with them to improve their well-being, many would take advantage of it. I pointed out obesity, which is 43%, and that's not overweight, that's obesity. Those folks want to lose weight. There are many reasons they don't, but part of the reason they don't is they don't have support teams built around them. They don't have lifestyle advice that they can implement into their life day in and day out. For anyone in this committee who was able to go running or exercising for 20 minutes yesterday, you probably did the equivalent of reducing $100 billion of expenses for Medicare and Medicaid just by being active. If Americans would do that every day, that's what we'd experience, but we haven't done that. One tactic that I believe will work quite effectively is if we can get real-time information from physicians and other health providers taking care of patients, and using that real-time information, give feedback to people who are worried about their well-being. That's when they're more likely to use that advice. That tool would allow them to both call an expert if they needed that resource. We'd provide them tools to do that. We'd reimburse some of the healthy lifestyles that would be generated by these interactions, and we'd make them an active participant in their well-being. I think that dramatically changes the power dynamic. It makes the American people feel like they actually can be the world experts on their well-being.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, nominated for Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator, testifying before the Senate Finance Committee. Question from the chair, Mike Crapo, Republican from Idaho. Ahead of the hearing, Democratic staffers on the committee put out a memo saying that Dr. Oz may have significantly underpaid Medicare and Social Security taxes in recent years. There's an AP story with this paragraph. The U.S. Office of Government Ethics has done an extensive review, in quotes, of Oz's finances. Spokesman Christopher Krepik said in a statement about Oz's taxes. He added that the office has indicated, again, quote, any potential conflicts have been resolved and he is in compliance with the law. One more moment from the hearing. Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat of New Mexico, appealed not to Dr. Oz, but to Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. through the TV to respond to multiple letters he sent regarding the measles outbreak.
Now, my colleagues and I have written twice to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to do more to address measles. There's not been a response. The same question asked of you today, if confirmed, would you respond to letters from members of this committee? I appreciate your strong response, yes. It might surprise the American people that Senator Kennedy or Secretary Kennedy said the same thing. So, Mr. Secretary, if you're watching today, respond to the damn letter. People are dying. I'm going to get back to the questions, Dr. Raj.
Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat from New Mexico, at today's Finance Committee hearing. This is Washington Today. ABC 7 News in Washington writes that education advocates, recently fired employees, and supporters gathered Friday morning at the U.S. Department of Education in Washington to protest recent mass firings and plans to dismantle the department. Officials said the rally, organized by various education and civil rights groups, aims to highlight the severe impacts these cuts will have on students across the country. And joining them, Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii.
So we're in the midst of chaos. Trump thinks that he and his pal Musk think that they can take a chainsaw to government agencies, and they've been slashing and burning and firing thousands of people for no cause. And just recently, of course, they got to the Department of Education. But we are all here to fight back, because this is no time to be sitting back thinking that other people are going to fight the battles for us. No, we are in it together. And you know what? I am a product of our public schools. I want you to know that I came here as an immigrant. I didn't speak a single word of English. There was no ESL back there, and the school that I went to cobbled together some kind of a program where I could learn English. And I don't remember what my first word was. I don't think it was the F word, but I think that would be appropriate right now, don't you think? So they created a lunch program because we also didn't have school lunches, yet another thing that the federal government provides to so many of our kids across our country, for whom that meal could be the one meal that they can count on every day. And so school lunch is really important. And then when I was in college, I paid for part of my college education through work study, yet another federal program. So I stand before you in full understanding of how important our education is, how foundational our public schools are, how it enabled me to stand with you today as we fight back on all this chaos, all of this. To say that Trump disrespects workers, that hardly suffices.
Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii, at today's rally in Washington outside the Education Department. There's an AP story. Elon Musk met this week with the leader of the National Security Agency, suggesting the nation's spy services won't escape the billionaire's scrutiny as he looks to slash spending and personnel across the federal government. Vice President J.D. Vance spoke about the economy and the Trump-Vance administration agenda today during a visit to the plastics manufacturer Vantage Plastics just outside of Bay City, Michigan. WJRT-TV reports that the 325,000 square foot manufacturing facility opened in 2023, reviving a long vacant plant along a busy thoroughfare in Bay County. The $40 million project created 93 jobs to recycle and produce large extruded plastic items. Here is Vice President Vance.
To be honest with you, the road ahead of us is long, but we are already, in just 7 short weeks, starting to see early indications of the president's vision becoming our shared American reality. This February, the president's first full month in office, America gained 10,000 American manufacturing jobs. Now, compare that to last year, when under the Biden administration, we were losing an average of about 10,000 manufacturing jobs per month. That's over 100,000 jobs in manufacturing lost in a single year under Joe Biden. And we got to ask ourselves, what has driven the turnaround? Well, first of all, President Trump has been clear about his plan, about our administration's plan. Our goal is to make it easier and more affordable to make things again in the United States of America. If you invest in America, in American jobs, in American workers, and in American businesses, you're going to be rewarded. We're going to cut your taxes. We're going to slash regulations, and we're going to reduce the cost of energy to build things right here in this country that all of us love. But if you try to undercut us and build outside of our borders, the President Trump's administration has got nothing for you. If you want to be rewarded, build in America. If you want to be penalized, build outside of America. It's as simple as that. So, if you've gotten rich the last few decades by ripping off U.S. companies and preying on American workers, well, the president is simply telling you the jig is up. If you want to manufacture in China, which has the worst and most punitive economic policies towards us anywhere in the world, then you are going to have to pay the consequences. And what we're seeing already is that the world is starting to listen. They appreciate that we're in a new era in the United States. So as a result, we're nearing $2 trillion in new investments announced just since President Trump took office. That's not bad. In 7 weeks, $2 trillion. From auto companies and chip makers to paper and electrical product manufacturers, companies from all over the world have announced new plants and big expansions of existing plants in the United States of America. We've seen car factories say 2 months ago, that they were going to ship American jobs off to Mexico, and 7 weeks ago, they started singing a different tune. Now, part of our comeback means unleashing America's energy and making it cheaper and making it more affordable for American businesses and workers to do what they need to do. So, day one in office, President Trump ended the Green New scam and ended Biden's war on American energy.
Vice President J.D. Vance today in Bay City, Michigan at a plastics company. He was joined by the head of the Small Business Administration, Kelly Loeffler. From Associated Press, former U.S. Senator Alan Simpson, a political legend whose quick wit bridged partisan gaps in the years before today's political acrimony has died. He was 93. Former President George W. Bush called Simpson one of the finest public servants ever to have graced our nation's capital. My family will remember him best, not for his many accomplishments, but for his loyal friendship and sharp sense of humor, Bush said in a statement. Alan Simpson displayed his humor and his view of politicians at the funeral of President George H.W. Bush in 2018.
But he often said, when the really tough choices come, it's the country, not me. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's for our country that I fought for. And he was a man of such great humility. Those who travel the high road of humility in Washington, D.C. are not bothered by heavy traffic. And he had a very serious flaw, known by all close to it. He loved a good joke, the richer the better. And he'd throw his head back and give that great laugh, but he never, ever could remember a punchline. And I mean never. So the punchline for George Herbert Walker Bush is this: you would have wanted him on your side. He never lost his sense of humor. Humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. That's what humor is. He never hated anyone. He knew what his mother and my mother always knew: hatred corrodes the container it's carried in.
Former U.S. Senator Alan Simpson, Republican from Wyoming, in 2018 at the funeral for former President George H.W. Bush. Alan Simpson has passed away at the age of 93. He served 1979 through 97, including a stint as Majority Whip from 1985 through 87. New York Times article on his death reads, folksy, irreverent, and sometimes cantankerous, a gaunt 6'7" beanpole with a ranch hand's soft drawl, Mr. Simpson was a three-term senator from 79 to 97, whom school children and tourists in the gallery sometimes took for a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington oddball, especially during the occasional rants against bug-eyed zealots and super greenies, as he liked to call environmental lobbyists. That was from the New York Times article. The two current senators from Wyoming paid tribute on the Senate floor today. Here's John Barrasso, Republican and the current majority whip.
He's known in Wyoming and in this body and across the country for his incredible life of service and really an unparalleled sense of humor. Throughout his life, Al boldly fought to uphold the values and the ideals of this great nation. Whether he was serving in the Army or the Wyoming House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, his commitment and his contributions were evident everywhere. He was well known for rolling up his sleeves, working with anyone, regardless of party, to do what he thought was best for Wyoming and the nation. When the nation called on Al Simpson, when they called on him to serve, he was always there fighting for our best interests.
Senator John Barrasso on the Senate floor, along with the other U.S. Senator from Wyoming, Cynthia Lummis, on the death of former Senator Alan Simpson. Former President Joe Biden, a Democrat, awarded Alan Simpson the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2022, saying at the time, Al exemplifies our national ideals of responsible governance, civil discourse, and public service. He was one of the most decent, stand-up, genuine guys I've ever served with. Another AP story, John Feinstein, one of the country's foremost sports writers and the author of numerous best-selling books, including the groundbreaking A Season on the Brink about college basketball coach Bob Knight, died unexpectedly Thursday. Feinstein was 69. John Feinstein was interviewed on C-SPAN's Q&A program in 2011 about his memoir, One-on-One, Behind the Scenes with the Greats in the Game.
How much impact does the federal government have on the world of sports in this country?
You know, I go back and forth on how I feel about that, because sometimes I think it would be best for government just to stay completely out of sports. A lot of the times when Congress gets involved, the hearings are basically television shows designed to give the congressmen and women involved exposure to a different audience when they're running for re-election, which they always are, certainly on the House of Representatives side. But the flip side is, sports is a multi-billion-dollar business in this country. It has a huge effect on the lives of people as fans, people in terms of raising money for universities, for higher education. There are so many different ways that sports affects our lives. Many of the stadiums that exist are built with government funds. So there are also times when I think the federal government should be more involved. And in fact, there have been times when I have suggested, and sometimes people think in jest, but that the president appoint, for lack of a better term, a czar of sports, somebody who can sort of come in when there's a crisis, whether it's a work stoppage, which we just saw in both the NFL football and in the NBA basketball in the last 6 months, and say, okay, you're going to come to me and we're going to fix this. We're going to work it out. Or when we have the kind of crises we're seeing in college athletics nowadays, which are topped off, for lack of a better term, by the horrors at Penn State in the last few months. So more and more as I get older, I think the federal government should be more involved than it has been.
Sports writer John Feinstein in 2011 on C-SPAN's Q&A about his memoir, One-on-One, Behind the Scenes with the Greats in the Game. He died on Thursday at the age of 69. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington. Emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.